you're tuning into something different, something deeper. Welcome to a space where the unseen becomes seen, where the patterns beneath reality are decoded. This isn't just a podcast, it's a journey into the mechanics of belief, perception, and the multidimensional truths shaping our world. If you've ever felt like an outsider looking in, questioning the systems you're told to follow, you're in the right place. This is the OUTKAST, the Pattern Podcast. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We've been sifting through some really thought-provoking material you shared. Particularly, it keeps circling back to this fascinating idea, doesn't it?
It really does.
Not stage magic, but something, well, much deeper. This concept of magic as a tool for actually building and implementing belief systems.
Yeah, and what's fascinating from our sources, and it definitely echoes that OUTKAST perspective, is this reframing of magic.
Right.
It sort of moves away from just supernatural stuff and leans more towards understanding it as the focused application of mental energy.
Mental energy. Like projecting ideas.
Exactly. Think of it as the deliberate projection of ideas specifically designed to, shape what people believe.
Okay. And that's precisely what we wanted to explore with you today. How this focused mental energy, these maybe intentionally crafted illusions, how they can be used to project beliefs out into the world and, well, ultimately influence our perception of reality.
Yeah, and the sources even touch on that idea of a multi-layered reality, where these belief systems kind of take hold.
They do. Now, knowing you're keen on getting to the core quickly, we're aiming for a deep dive that's insightful, but hopefully without getting too bogged down in unnecessary complexity.
Right. Okay, so let's really unpack this. Magic as a tool for belief systems, drawing directly from your materials.
Let's do it.
The source makes a key distinction, like we said. This isn't about, fantastical spells.
No wands involved.
No. It posits that magic, in this specific context, is the strategic use of mental energy, planting ideas, cultivating widespread belief.
And that aligns directly with what the OUTKAST podcast is trying to do, right? Identifying these recurring patterns in modern belief structures.
Precisely. And the source emphasizes that these belief systems aren't just accidental. They seem to be intentionally created.
Intentionally? For what purpose?
Well, according to the source, primarily for influencing behavior or maybe facilitating learning.
Wow. So consider that for a moment. The fundamental things we might hold to be true. They might be deliberately shaped to achieve some kind of outcome.
It definitely raises a crucial question, doesn't it? How do these systems operate? How do they maintain their hold?
Yeah.
Interestingly, the source suggests that our own, innate psychic abilities, they aren't something external to be feared.
Okay.
But they're maybe the very tools we can use to understand and ultimately move beyond these imposed systems.
So use our own inner stuff to see through the outer stuff.
Kind of. It discusses a process of becoming unlearned by these systems, the goal being to reach what it calls sovereign morality.
Sovereign morality. That's a powerful phrase. Suggesting an internal ethical compass, maybe? Independent of external control.
That seems to be the idea, guided by inner wisdom, not just external rules.
Okay, this leads us to a really intriguing part of the source material, this idea of a false overlay. What's the thinking behind that term?
Well, the source postulates this belief, right? A belief in a constructed system, almost like you said, a magical act or program.
Okay.
Being superimposed, layered onto the existing reality of the universe.
Superimposed, like a filter.
Something like that. It touches on the idea of a reset, but argues that what's actually happening isn't a clean break. It's not a total wipe.
So no cosmic creedal plus alt plus delete.
Apparently not. Instead, there's this continuous effort to influence and construct this overlaid perception of reality.
Right. So not a complete erasure and restart, but something more subtle, an ongoing manipulation of what we perceive as real.
That's the idea presented. And the source gets specific here. It identifies the tree of Kabbalah as playing a central role in this false system.
The tree of Kabbalah, how so?
Within the framework of the source, it's identified as a critical key or capstone, something that holds this entire constructed system together.
That's a very specific claim. Potentially controversial, I'd imagine.
Definitely. It suggests certain, esoteric structures are viewed as foundational to the belief system being critiqued, implying a deliberate architecture to this false overlay.
Okay, here's where the source material gets really compelling, I think. It uses the analogy of a magic show.
Ah, yes, the magic show.
The point being made is that a magician's illusions They're only effective if the audience, well, chooses to believe in them.
Right.
And a direct parallel is drawn between this and the power of belief systems in general.
Precisely. From this perspective, the strength of these systems, these overlays, lies entirely in the collective belief of individuals.
So if enough people buy into the illusion,
Then it effectively becomes their shared reality.
yeah. The example used is David Copperfield. His seemingly impossible feats were captivating because the audience was willing, maybe even eager, to believe.
It really makes you think, doesn't it, about the sheer diversity of belief systems out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The source touches on a few examples. Mormonism's idea of individuals becoming creators of universes. Right. Or the Buddhist concept of bardos, those intermediate states.
Or the Hindu pantheon with multiple gods. They're all incredibly different frameworks for understanding existence.
Totally different realities, in a way.
And then the source introduces a rather unsettling example, but pertinent. Mark Hoffman.
Ah, the forger of Latter-day Saint documents, yes.
What's significant there in the context of this discussion is the implication. If beliefs can be deliberately fabricated
Hey.
and successfully introduced into a system, well, what does that tell us about the potential fragility or maybe the constructed nature of those belief systems themselves?
It definitely forces you to consider questions of authenticity, the possibility of intentional deception right at the foundations of what people hold sacred.
It's a stark reminder, yeah. What we accept as truth might not always be what it seems.
Yeah.
Maybe belief itself can be, well, manufactured.
Okay, shifting focus slightly. The source brings up some interesting modern parallels to this idea of constructed realities, specifically smart cities and the symbolic pillars of Solomon.
Right. The source proposes that this contemporary push towards smart cities, it can be interpreted as a modern-day example
An example of what, exactly?
of intentionally constructing a technologically mediated representation of a world that exists sort of on top of our current one.
Ah, like another layer.
Exactly. And this is likened to the Pillars of Solomon, suggesting these are like fundamental supporting structures for this new overlaid reality, structures designed to manage and influence behavior on a systemic level.
And there's that rather evocative, almost dark reference too, about one of the pillars in Solomon's temple being held up by Asmodeus as punishment.
Yeah, alongside the classical myths, like Hercules and Atlas holding up the world.
It paints a picture, doesn't it? These foundational elements potentially having a less than purely benevolent origin, at least according to this viewpoint.
Definitely adds a layer of complexity or darkness to the analogy.
So this naturally leads to the challenge, right? How do you discern what's genuinely real when these overlaid systems can be so pervasive, maybe even intentionally manipulated?
It's a huge challenge. The source briefly suggests consulting religious scriptures as one potential method for navigation.
Okay.
However, it then introduces this rather extreme notion. Certain individuals, referred to as magicians, claiming the ability to transform into godlike beings.
Ooh, okay. Godlike.
And create new universes by destroying previous ones.
That's pretty mind-bending. This continuous cycle of creation and destruction driven by what? Human egoic perceptions?
That's the phrase used, leading ultimately to a critical threshold of chaos.
The threshold of chaos. But it's important to get the nuance here in the source's argument.
Right.
It clarifies that while the idea of a completely artificial universe, an entirely false one, might not be accurate,
Okay.
the narratives, the overlay of the system itself, these are presented as very real. They have tangible effects on our lives, our perceptions, provided you're attuned to recognizing them.
Provided you can see the pattern, maybe.
Perhaps. And what is it, according to the source, that actually sustains this whole elaborate system? Good question. What holds it up?
It points squarely to the collective beliefs of the populace. It describes it as a kind of soul agreement. Yeah.
Built on blood and bones and beliefs of people. That's a very potent image. Very visceral.
It really underscores the immense power attributed to shared consciousness, collective acceptance.
Yeah.
The source goes further, describing the system, the overlay, as an ongoing magical ritual.
Constantly perpetuated. How?
Through various elements in our media landscape, it suggests actors, false political references, manufactured polarities, corrupted creatives, movie and plastic fake personas.
So basically, much of modern media culture.
That seems to be the implication, all seemingly designed to keep people engaged, entertained, and perhaps ultimately distracted from a deeper understanding of what might be happening.
However, the source also offers a sense of limitation, right? It suggests the corruption or demise of the universe itself is not permitted.
Yes, it does put a boundary there, potentially linking this limitation to things like astrological cycles or deeply held beliefs within astronomy. So there are inherent boundaries to this overlay, it seems.
Okay, so it's not all powerful, maybe?
That's the suggestion. And when we consider individual agency within this framework, how do we act?
Yeah. What about free will?
The source defines true free will as a state of profound self-knowledge, knowing oneself.
Knowing thyself?
Exactly. It argues that knowing oneself deeply allows for concise creative thoughts and intentions to manifest effectively, clearly.
Self-awareness is key.
It seems so. This internal self-awareness reveals what exists within, allowing one to experience the kingdom of heaven, as it puts it, as an inner reality.
And in that state, free will is fulfillment.
That's the word used, fulfillment, not just choice, but alignment and purpose found within.
So even within this potentially all-encompassing system of belief and illusion, the key to individual autonomy, maybe freedom, lies in understanding oneself at a really fundamental level.
That appears to be the core message regarding agency. But the source also makes an important point about the limitations of individual action in, say, dismantling this system.
Right. What does it say there?
It explicitly states that the system will continue to operate. It functions based on the beliefs and experiences of the majority.
Ah. So even if one person opts out.
Exactly. Even if a single individual chooses not to participate or believe, it keeps going because others are still immersed in it.
Okay.
And significantly, it emphasizes that it is not the responsibility of any one person, including the listener,
Right.
to try and save everyone from this perceived overlay.
That's a really important point. It could potentially alleviate some of maybe the weight of this information.
It could. Taking responsibility for oneself, for one's own perception, seems to be the focus.
Okay. Finally, the source touches on the potential motivations behind creating and maintaining this false overlay. Why would anyone do this?
It suggests these ministers of magic, or misery, as the source calls them.
Ministers of misery. Wow.
That they actively work to stimulate and direct the minds and consciousness of people, children, and adults both.
To what end?
To channel their energy, their focus, in very specific ways, thereby reinforcing this constructed reality. It implies a deliberate, ongoing effort.
Shaping not just what people believe, but where their mental energy goes.
Precisely. That's the picture painted by the source material.
Okay. So to try and bring this all together, what we've explored in this deep dive, really based on the compelling material you shared and those insights from the OUTKAST, the Pattern podcast, is this truly intriguing concept of magic. Magic operating as a fundamental tool for creating, for maintaining belief systems. Systems that ultimately shape our shared reality, our individual perceptions.
Yeah, we've examined how focused mental energy, these carefully constructed illusions perhaps, how they're powered by collective belief.
Right, projecting ideas into the world and sustaining them.
And what's particularly striking, I think, and it resonates strongly with the themes often explored, is this idea of identifying the underlying patterns, the mechanisms at play and shaping what we believe to be true, and then how those beliefs turn around and influence our experience of the world.
Seeing the structure beneath the surface.
Something like that.
Okay. And on that note, here's a final thought maybe for you, the listener, to consider. Reflect on the information, the media you engage with day to day. What recurring patterns do you observe? Could these patterns be, in some way, contributing to this overlay we've been discussing?
It's a good question to ask.
We'd encourage you to maybe examine your own beliefs. What are they based on? And think about the mental energies that might be influencing your own perspective and maybe the broader reality around you.
Or just observing the world differently.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.